Life. Well, life is full of choices. And at 16 years old, you might say people don't have too many choices to make, or the youngsters don't have too many choices to make. But at 16 years of age, there are quite a lot of choices people make. The 16-year-olds I know decide whether they want to have a PS4 or an Xbox, whether they want to get an A grade, a B grade, a C grade, or at least pass at the exams. A very important choice they want to know is whether she likes me or not, or whether he likes me or not. And in some cases, whether my parents will find out about he or she. Now, at the age of 16, I made a different choice. And that choice was I learned to ride a bike. Now, employment is something that's important for all of us. And I'm sure most of you here are employed. Now, why do we work? For pay, to build a character for ourselves, and so forth. Back in the early 30s, 40s, people worked at different ages. You had kids working at the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there was a lot of abuse and exploitation of kids. So laws were brought in the mid-30s and mid-40s to stop the exploitation of children working. In 1938, the US brought in the Fair Labor Act, which limited the kids working, but it still allowed children as young as 10, 11, 12 to work under certain conditions. Even the Bahrain labor law allows for kids as young as 15 to work under certain conditions. Now, over time, things changed. And if you look at the US, I'm sure most of you have seen the movies where you have kids doing their paper routes, mowing lawns, having their lemonade stands, and so forth. In the US, 75% of college grads would have worked either full-time or part-time before they joined college. Now, that's a large number of kids. That's a large number of kids. Coming back to my story of how I learned to ride the bike. At the age of 16, I made a choice of starting to work. Now, this was not leaving my education aside. It was to complement my education. I was still at school, and I decided I'll try and DJ. Turns out I was not too good at it. So then I started teaching maths. Thankfully for my students, I was okay. And I taught friends, brothers, sisters, and colleagues. Good living. I still studied. I went to school. I compared. Now, this is not the comparing that you think of, this fancy dance events. Here I was, the little small 16-year-old sitting in a corner in a supermarket and announcing what's the deal for the day. That kind of comparing. And then I also walked into Domino's, this large multinational fast food chain, and I said, hey, do you have part-time work? And they said, no, we don't have something called part-time. And this was back in Sri Lanka. And I said, well, I would like to work part-time. I have free time, I'd like to give it up. And then, since my English was fairly okay, they decided to recruit me. So here I am, 16 years old. At that time, we didn't have the selfie phenomenon, so I don't have a picture of myself. And here I am, 16 years of age, working at Domino's, while I schooled as well. Now, I learned a lot of things. Now, I didn't work because my parents couldn't afford it. I worked because I wanted to find myself. I wanted independence for myself. I wanted to know who I am. Now, I learned a lot of things. And by the way, when my parents found out, that was about 6 months after I started working, that's all, that was not a good sight. Why was that? Well, that's simply because my parents and my father especially thought that, well, if he's working, what would everybody else say? What would the family members say? What would the cousins say? What would people say? Can't he afford to pay for my education? That's why. It's also because our parents and that generation had to make a choice, and that choice was not and or. It was they had to make a choice. Are they going to work or are they going to study? They couldn't do both together. But for us, it's a different choice. It's work and study at the same time. So I'm going to share with you a couple of lessons I learned at 16 years of age that I feel you can only learn once you start riding the bike. And these were financial education. Now, financial education is important for all of us. I mean, once we start working, once we get our paycheck, once we have our own savings accounts, We need to be concerned about how we save our money. Now, as this little kid, as soon as I got my first paycheck, well, what did I do? I went out and bought all the toys I could imagine of, or at least I could afford. Right? It was not too much of a pay. Well, the second month I realized, hey, I don't have anything left. I've been working really hard and I don't have any money left. So I saved up. At least that sense came to me, because it was hard work and I knew what 100 rupees or 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees meant. Now, after a couple of months, I ended up buying myself a mobile phone. Now, it's not the mobile phones that all of you have today. My one, a very special feature it had, was the snake game. And I must say, I loved it. So here I was, spent 4 months of my salary buying myself a mobile phone. And I mean, I was floating it around, walking around with it. And one day, as I walked home, late evening after school, it was a dark alley. As I walked down, this was maybe about a month after I bought my phone. Two guys approached me and stole my phone. Now, at 16 years of age, I had spent all my savings of hard work. And that was just gone like this, in a flash. It was just all gone. I lost it. Now, that really did kick some sense into me. I was devastated. I was just torn apart. And I still remember going to the cops, and the cops said, hey, do you know the color of the vehicle? And I said, yes, it was a green color. That's enough, we'll find it. And as this 16-year-old, I had this hope. I just knew they're going to find it for me. That's what they are for. They're going to find the bad guys and give me back my phone. Well, I didn't get my phone back. Now, that's something I learned at a very young age. The good news is I didn't buy myself another phone. I saved up. And over time, I was able to fund myself through school, where we went to India on a foreign trip. Now, I didn't fund the whole trip, but at least I was able to fund a small part of it. I was 17 years of age. Negotiation, problem solving. Well, as kids, we negotiate with our parents on what toy we want. Right? We do problem solve in school. But the corporate world, I'm sure you know, it's a different world out there. Negotiating with your boss or colleagues of what shift to work. You've got a customer on the phone who is screaming at you that his pizza is 1 minute delayed. You figure out, you look at the system and you see he gave you the wrong address and he wants his pizza for free. Now, those are problems that I had to solve. Those are serious problems. As a 16-year-old, when you're helpless sometimes. Now, these are things I learned at that age. Work-life balance. It's slightly different. It's life-work balance. Prioritizing things. Here I had my friends, my family, spare time, and I had work. I had to prioritize. I had to know what's important, where to give my time. I couldn't spend all my time at work, because then I would get a bad grade in school. Or my parents, my dad would wonder, where is he? Because he didn't know at that time. I learned to balance life with all other things. Teamwork. Now, yes, in school we learn about teamwork and all of this. But remember, academic is somewhat individualistic. You study hard, you work on your own, and you pass, you get good grades. And you look around and you say, well, I did it. Corporate world, it's not like that. You could be the best you are. You could be the best. But if the guys around you, if your team is not equally up to mark, you're nowhere. That's the teamwork I learned. And then also working with people who were 3-4 times elder to me, who couldn't speak the same language, who came from different demographic, sociographic backgrounds. I learned all of that. It was not easy, but I learned something. Work experience, well, obviously I gained experience. And how did this help me is when I went for my first formal job at the age of 18. I was asked the usual questions, and the last question I was asked is, what would you do if you had a tough customer? And I was given a scenario. The first thing that popped into my head was that angry customer screaming about his pizza and how I handled it. That's something I learned. Building a network. Now, we all know network is critical for everything we do. I had some spare time after school, so I used to go to work earlier at about 2:30. And our outlet was located in the financial hub in Sri Lanka. So my manager, who was a bright spark, decided, hey, I'm going to use this guy who can speak English. and send him to these banks and insurance institutes around the place and get my pizza sold. So here I was, this little brat with a tie on, and let me tell you, this was the first time I wore a tie that was not my school tie, walking in from bank to financial house to investment house, trying to sell lunch deals. I'll tell you one thing, lunch orders did go up. That's the good news. Transition to adulthood. People say today's younger generation are not mature enough. They're not grown up yet. Well, there's nothing else that can make you grow up as much as when you're pushed into the corporate world. You can't go crying to your boss or your parents saying, hey, that guy bullied me, or that guy didn't do this, or that guy didn't do that. You're going to man up and take it on your own, adulthood. Humility. Here I was, coming from a well-to-do background, but still I used to wait tables, clean the dishes, sometimes at 12, 1 in the night, cleaning the whole outlet. I came from a well-to-do family. I learned that you could be anybody, you could be at any tier within an organization, but you're still an important part. I learned to treat people equally, not worrying about social classes. But ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing I learned very important, and that was to tip the waiter or the delivery guy. Always. Don't forget that. We waited for that tip. Now, let's look at the US. Different culture, right? Different ways of living. But if you look at the US, 1 in 25 or 4% of the working population, full-time or part-time, are teenagers. 4%. Let's look at Bahrain. It's 1%. It's actually slightly less than 1%. Let's look at youth unemployment or the economically inactive. Let's worry about youth unemployment later. The economically inactive are those that decide not to join the workforce until they are ready, or because they've got education or all other reasons. In Kuwait, it's 50%. 50% of those that are economically inactive are below the age of 24. In Saudi, it's 43%. Now, these are high numbers. If you look at youth unemployment, the Middle East is the highest globally. I mean, for a couple of years, we could say we were second place because North Africa was slightly higher. We beat them. Well, it's not something we should be proud about. We are the highest, and by far, much higher than East Asia, South Asia. These are developing economies. We are still far higher than them, much higher. If you look at labor force participation, that's the number of youth, those below the age of 24 in the labor force. Again, the Middle East is the lowest. We've got the lowest number of youth in the labor force. Now, what do you say? This is the most worrying part, is our youth is doubling. In the last 30 years, from 1980 to 2010, the number of youth in the Middle East has increased by 2-fold. So our problem is not stagnant. Our problem is increasing and doubling every single day. What do we need to do? Someone once asked me, what's the solution? The problem is there is no one solution. There is no one size fits all. We need proactive social economic policies that will help drive skills of the youth. But it all needs to come together, and it needs to start from all of us. We shouldn't be waiting for somebody else to bring it about. There is no one solution. A recent study in the Middle East showed that of those that are looking for work, the youngsters looking for work, one of the biggest complaints they had was that they didn't have work experience. 55% of those that were surveyed said, I can't find a job, or I was rejected because I don't have work experience. Now it comes to the usual conundrum, that's something that's globally, is no job, no experience, no job. The good news is there is still hope. And that hope is Lucas, who I met a couple of weeks ago. Some of you might have seen him at Adlia. Now, Lucas reminds me a lot about myself. This young gentleman who is in his... Lucas, by the way, is the guy in the middle. The rest of the two are his employees. See, he's gone far above me. right? So Lucas, at the age of 14, 13, decided that he's going to spend his extra time making a living, learning something. So he sells stroopwafels. It's a Dutch cuisine, and I'm not sure whether you've tried it. You should. It's really, really good. Now, he sells this at weekend markets, right? He sells it to some of the coffee shops, and he does this. But his parents know. That's the good news. He's not making it in the kitchen late in the evenings and hiding it from his parents. His parents support him a lot. And he, over the last couple of years, has made more than 5,000 dinars doing simply this. Now, he owns all the equipment. He actually bought it from his father because his father funded it to help him. And then once he had enough money, he bought it back from his father. He said, hey, I'm going to pay for this. It's mine. Now, there is still hope, ladies and gentlemen. But all of us need to make a change. All of us need to lead this change because we can't wait for change to happen. We have to take ownership. So we need to tell our brothers, our sisters, our friends, our cousins, our uncles, our aunts, and everyone around us. We need to tell our own children that it's okay to complement your education with work. It's okay. Because after all, there is only one way to learn to ride a bike. Thank you.